Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the council meeting in the city of Marshfield, Tuesday, September 26th. Call to order, roll call. Please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Item C, identify possible conflicts of interest. Are there any possible conflicts of interest with any of the alder people this evening? And I do not have a screen, so I have to reach over and look at Jess's. So if you see me doing funny things, that's normal, but I have to do this. So here we go. Seeing no possible conflicts, we'll go on to item D, which is public comment period correspondence. At this time, I will recognize those members of the public who have indicated a desire to address the council. Upon recognition by me, people may address the council, first stating their name and address. Council may act on emergency matters introduced by members of the public. First up, we have Perry Stargart. Perry, if you come to the lectern, and you'll probably have to push the little button underneath the microphone and state your name and address and the subject. And you have 5 minutes from when you start.
My name is Perry Stargart. I live at 1509 Northwood here in Marshfield, and I love pickleball. All right. My wife and I, when we become snowbirds now, so we go down south. The first thing we look for is where are the pickleball courts. Then we look for housing. We just love it. We go, it's a block away. Here in Marshfield, we started playing on Oak Street. 4 pickleball courts there. We have outgrown that. This past year, we went to the middle school. We were able to set up 8 portable courts there. By the end of the summer, we were filling the 8 portable courts there. I'm under the understanding that we have 12 pickleball courts to be built here in Marshfield next year. Thank you. It is much needed. It's been growing. We've been growing about 25% here in town. We probably would even be growing more than that, but we have just maxed out the facilities. So I really appreciate that. It's going to come in handy. The whole park is going to be beautiful. Looking forward to it. Anybody that hasn't played pickleball, you're welcome. Come on down. Everybody will have a paddle. Don't worry if you don't have one. You want to learn how to play the game, we'll give you a paddle. We'll teach you. The community, the surrounding community, anybody, come on down and play. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. I guarantee you'll have laughs. I have my cup of coffee in the morning. I go play pickleball. I laugh. I have a great time. I'll play with 20 different players, and just like that, it's noon. What a way to start your day. And the next day I can do it again. Love it. And everybody will tell you that here, you're going to have a laugh. You're going to have a good time. The president of pickleball, he made the comment that it's bringing communities closer together. We say, why is that? Because pickleball does not discriminate against race, gender, political affiliation, religion. It's simply the next 4 up. That's pickleball. If you don't know what next 4 up, come on down to the courts and you'll learn in a hurry. Any court across this nation, it's simply next 4 up. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Perry. And thank you to all the people that have come here in support. How exciting. Yet one more great thing in the city of Marshfield. Anyone else would like to make a public comment? Any other public comments? Seeing none, we'll go on to item E, approval of minutes, September 12th, 2023. We have a motion by Alderman O'Reilly, second by Alderman Fire. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Wagner. Wagner.
Yes.
Spiros.
Yes.
Rigel.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. Item F, staff updates. Vanderhay Waters 2023 report presented by Amanda Bruce, Recreation Manager. Thank you.
Hello. I think everybody knows me at this point in time. If
Is
not, I'm
your
Amanda. I'm the
microphone
rec manager. I'm very short, and I've been here for just over 2 years. We had a great season at Vanderhay Waters, and this is the presentation of the end of season report. Everybody should have a packet, and there's a lot of visual aids in there, so I'm just gonna kind of go through it quickly. Just think of questions as we go. We had a great season at Vandahay Waters in 2023. We had 60% of the employees there were actually returning employees, which was great, and that number included 74% returning lifeguards, which was huge. Takes 30 plus lifeguards to run that place, so that was really great to see all those people coming back. We had a total of 73 operational days planned in the budget, so then we scheduled for just a little bit more to account for weather cancellations and stuff like that. So we scheduled 76 days, and actually with weather cancellations came out right at 73 operating days total. This year, we had 7 operating hours per day, and last year we operated 8 hours per day. We're hoping to keep that the same for next year. Like a 12 to 7 is what we were at this year. At the bottom of the first page, you can kind of see an overall summary. Read what you want as well, but the summary basically is attendance was down about 5,000 compared to 2022. Revenue was up a little bit. We did increase prices slightly in admissions and concessions items, and then expenses were also decreased compared to 2022 by quite a bit. Well, there's more details later on, but factor in less operational hours and the warm weather that we had. On page 2, I just kind of graphed the attendance historically from HEFCO, included the COVID year, so there's a huge dip at 0. And then the last 2 years, you can see the Vandahay Waters. So over time, you'll be able to use a graph for a nice visual on how that facility is being used. And then at the bottom of that page, it shows so last year, our scheduled hours to actual hours was 83%, which was the highest it had ever been compared to HEFCO. And then this year it was even higher, but I do want to make sure that that's known that we had a very hot and dry summer. We did not have a lot of storms, so we did not have to cancel very often. I just want to make sure that's noted that that's likely an anomaly, or hopefully an anomaly, and shouldn't be expected year to year. On page 3, I did a big chart of the busiest days of the week. Well, it's pretty much the attendance per day all summer, but you can see the busiest days per week. Interestingly, last year we had Tuesday and Wednesday were our busiest days of the week overall, and this year it was Fridays and Saturdays. So that kind of would tell me that maybe we have some travelers coming from out of town to visit us on the weekend. So hopefully that would be a good trend too. Last year we were kind of under the assumption that locals were leaving town on the weekend for lake and sports and stuff like that. So hopefully this is bringing people in. I also added at the bottom of page 3, season pass to day pass check-ins. So this year, more people were using their season pass to scan in than last year. Page 4 shows our total revenue and a breakdown of all of that. And then it shows the increase. Just if you have any questions along the way, just stop me. And then the transaction breakdown at the bottom of page 4 also shows that we're pretty much the same between cash transactions to credit and debit transactions. This year and last year was close to 70% cash and check transactions, and then around 30% for credit and debit. Our operational expenses are shown on page 5. That decreased quite a bit this year. We did decrease our operational hours as a money-saving measure as well. So it's broken down here for you, but wages and benefits, we were able to get pay increase for our lifeguards and our attendants. So pay increased, but the staffing, we started the season with less attendance on staff, and we were kind of okay. On busy days, it's a little bit hard to justify fewer attendance, so there were times we had to call people in. But then when it was slower, we were able to send people home as a cost-saving measure as well. And then utilities were really down, and I really want to attribute that to the weather. If it doesn't rain, the chemicals aren't all messed with in the pools. The heating isn't messed up, and then the sun also helped heat the water as well. May have been pointed out a couple weeks into summer that the water was colder than people would like, so we did increase it a little bit, but that was a cost-saving measure initially as well. And then repairs, equipment, and supplies all decreased, which would hopefully be expected. And included in that is concessions, which is broken down later on as well. But repairs and equipment, that's going to hopefully go down continuously as we get things rolling. And then at the bottom of page 5, there's a historical cost recovery data spreadsheet or chart. This year our cost recovery was 109% basically. So we were able to come out a little bit ahead on the pool, which is not ever known to be a thing. So that was exciting to see. And then on page 6, in 2022, I'm going to read just a little bit of this. In 2022, a recommendation to reduce expenses at Vandahay Waters was proposed, and it was suggested to me to contract out the concessions operation. We put out a request for proposals to the public, reached out to people individually via phone and email, and then there were no proposals submitted by the deadline. So without any request for proposals, we were not able to contract out concessions. We had to do a budget resolution for concessions money since that stuff had been written out of our budget. The numbers were approved and they're right there. And then we were able to successfully run a concession stand this year. I did break down kind of our top sellers in concessions. And then I was also asked to provide some healthier options, which did not go over so well. I don't think people are going to the pool to eat fruit and peanuts. So ice cream and slushies and pretzels were the top sellers this year. Like I said, we did adjust our prices a little bit to make up for this additional expense. But overall, I think things went very well there. And then on the last page, it shows a staff summary. So I'll let you read that. I'm not going to go through the details. It's just noted there. And then a facility summary of things I thought were important to mention. So I'll let you read those, but the one thing I did want to mention is we did increase recreation programming at the facility. Last year we offered lap swim, and that was about the only thing and then we had one session of aquasize last year as well. This year we had offered lap swim, we ran an aquasize class, and then we offered 2 sessions of aqua Zumba. So the programming overall there has increased as well. Which also increases revenue over time at that facility. So I'll let you kind of read the rest of it. If you have questions, let me know. One thing that's not included in the report, and I think it's important to recognize, it's going to be hard. A lot of people heard the news about Sophia, and she was an employee at Vandahay Waters, and I just wanted to make sure that it's known that she'll be very deeply missed next year. But I wanted to make sure that we acknowledge that tonight. So that's all I have. So.
Any questions for Amanda? Alderman Stauber?
Thank you for the report and the presentation. A couple of things I mentioned when we ran into the issue with the concession stand and not having someone willing to support that. And I'm glad it worked out. But has the group that you lead taken any different approach to try to get someone next year to take over the concessions, whether it be a not-for-profit or some other organization in Marshfield?
Not specifically yet. We just closed within the last month, and I thought that concessions were ran very well, and it was fairly, I don't know if profitable is the right word, but everything worked out really well. I didn't have any staffing issues whatsoever. Honestly, and last year I did have staffing issues, which was a headache. This year everything went really smoothly though, so I wouldn't anticipate that to be a need next year. If I'm told to do that, I will definitely explore those options.
Yeah, it would be nice just to avoid what we went through this year, last minute kind of thing. And the other thing, I'll say 2 more things. One, you know, the aquatic facility is a private-public partnership, and the Vandahays were gracious enough to support it. And I really want to say thank you for having such a full program, really making use of the facility. And I think that'll help, you know, with other private-public partnership that we have in the future. And then finally, I'd be open to any ideas you would bring forward regarding the loss of the life.
We're working on stuff.
Okay.
Kind of talk about it.
Thank you.
It's a really hard subject right now. But I mean, the rec programming itself, so I just want to make sure very clear that it's being used quite a bit, even when there's not like operating hours for revenue sources and non-revenue sources. Obviously, we do our lifeguard trainings at least once a week there. We have preseason training that is several hours for both attendants and lifeguards. And then this year, I forgot to mention too, we did an adaptive swim day as well. So for people who need like a quieter environment to swim, we worked with the public on that a little bit and offered it one time. Hopefully that kind of grows a little bit in the future too.
I do have one more follow-up, if I could. I was on the original pool study committee years ago before this one got roots. And one of the things we strived for was multi-generational use.
Mhm.
Are we seeing much of that with adult
Yeah,
aerobics or
so
something
we
like
have the adult lap swim is what it's called, adult lap swim. It's for 16 and over, but there's not a lot of 16-year-olds that are coming to that. It is people who want to get their swimming exercise in. So adults, I guess I'm not sure if they're working and coming on a lunch break or whatever, because it's kind of late in the morning, but the water has to warm up too.
Yeah.
But there's a mix of ages in that for sure.
I think like a senior event of some kind, like aerobics was an idea we floated around back then.
Yeah, we have aqua size.
Okay.
We offered several sessions and we had enough to run one session, which is better than last year because we offered several last year and had enough to run 0. So
Okay.
Hopefully that'll grow. But I think the time of day factors into that a lot because you can't really get the population that takes that class, you can't get them in the water at 8 in the morning, where I can get the lifeguards in the water for training at 8 in the morning. They can be a little chilly, right? But if we can offer the class around 10 to 10:45 a couple days a week, that's a little bit warmer in the morning for.
Probably playing pickleball with Barry.
Yeah, they can play pickleball and then come cool down
Yeah.
at the pool.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Werman?
Thank you. Yeah, I did want to say also condolences to the family and the Van de Hay Water staff and anyone else whose life was touched by Sophia. I did see, and I'm not going to pretend that it was my idea, on a social media post that hopefully there's some way that you guys can honor her, even if it's some sort of employee recognition award. So definitely wanted to pass that along and second Councilmember Stauber's recommendation there. And then just a little bit of feedback / thoughts. I did see a lot of communication and heard a lot from people in my neighborhood with younger kids that last week, which is normally open for the pool and was closed this year, there was just a lot of talks about that. And if now that we have a little bit of preparation time for next season, if we could look at some way to mitigate that, knowing that we have seasonal staff that are usually college kids or high school kids, and we usually miss out on that week because they're going back to school. If there's something we could start looking at to keep the pool open for that last week prior to Labor Day.
Historically, we've always closed around that time in August. So obviously it's a bigger facility, so I get why people are probably recognizing it more now that it's closed, but it's literally been closing at the same, within a couple days pretty much. And we're not far off from anyone else in central Wisconsin. Wisconsin Rapids actually opened and closed on the exact same day as us, and that wasn't even planned. So, and they're the closest one to us. So
Could be
at least we know that we're not far off from, what's that?
Could be the wonderful heat wave we had, to your point.
Yeah. And then we closed and then I taught a lifeguard class. I'm like, well, we should have open today because it's 90, so.
Yep.
But yeah,
Always,
staff
thank you.
factors into that.
Amanda, I'd like to congratulate you and your crew and thank you for everything that you've done over the last year. How exciting from the year before. And again, sympathy goes out. Anything we can help you with, do not hesitate.
Okay.
And again, keep it up. We're looking forward to next year.
Thanks.
Our second staff update is by Nick from the Utilities Commission.
Thank you. Tonight I'd like to present some prepared remarks on 2 topics. First on our electric system design based on a request, and then also talk a little bit about discolored water. As many of you know, the electric grid is complicated and is constantly evolving network. Ensuring reliable power is essential, and this means sizing of our equipment to meet the highest demands even during exceptional circumstances is needed. In August, as you guys were just talking about with the warm weather, we encountered a record-breaking peak demand of 79 megawatts. This is a nearly 10% increase from the previous high that we've experienced. And obviously it was driven by the multiple days of extreme temperatures. These events require that our system is sized to handle maximum demand, even for short periods of time, to ensure power is not interrupted to our customers. Our infrastructure faces various threats, including extreme weather events, cybersecurity risk, and physical attacks on substations. There are reports of threats like these on a daily basis to electric utilities throughout the United States. Weather-related challenges requiring additional planning margins. While the current geopolitical climate makes cybersecurity a significant concern that we're dealing with, and physical attacks on substations. I'm sure many of you have seen in recent times the attacks in North Carolina, in Washington State, and unfortunately they're increasing across the nation. Addressing these threats demands increased monitoring, system enhancements, hardening, and capital investment in new infrastructure. To enhance reliability and resiliency of our substations and distribution line network, to enhance reliability and resiliency, our substations and our distribution lines networks are interconnected to serve as backups. Our planning includes an N-1 contingency analysis, ensuring normal operation even in the face of a single contingency event, such as a failure of a substation component. This involves identifying backup equipment, assessing loading levels, and planning for the future system improvements. This analysis allows maintenance activities on equipment at a substation or on a distribution line to be scheduled strategically and completed generally without interruption of service to our customers. This means that your home could be fed from any of our different substations depending on our system configuration at any point throughout the year. The distribution of load across our system is constantly changing. Our system's design and layout over the 20 years that I've worked at the utility has undergone multiple transformations due to these changes. Some of the recent developments like the Daniels residential neighborhood, expansions of existing businesses like H&S and Nasonville Dairy, new facilities like the Laird Center for Medical Research and the PCA facility all place additional demands on our electric system in different ways. These are just a few examples as new development needs electricity, as we see every day new developments that are popping up in our community. And this leads to changes in how our electric distribution system is set up and configured. Our system load has evolved over the years due to weather development, and economic factors. Looking ahead, two major factors that could significantly impact electric loading, especially in our residential area, include electric vehicles and electrification. Electric vehicles, their future impact depends on factors like how fast electric vehicles roll out, how fast people buy the vehicles, how they charge, and also how the battery technology associated with those vehicles advances. Electrification involves converting household items like water heaters, heating system, and stoves from natural gas to propane to electricity, ultimately reducing carbon emissions. Some regions in the United States are already restricting natural gas services in new developments and only allowing electricity. While the timing and impact of EVs and electrification may vary, we must prioritize research, planning, and procurement. We've adjusted our own construction standards to remain flexible as these new loads develop. And industry studies have shown a potential of a 30 to 50% increase in our loading by 2050 from these developments. Even if adoption in our area is slower than across the US, a 10 to 15% increase will have an impact that we need to plan for. Generally, we have seen areas in the community where home values are higher, like the west side of the city, have higher adoption rates for installation of solar panels on their houses. So it's possible that the adoptions of electric vehicles and electrification may follow a similar path due to the disposable income in those neighborhoods. Supporting this future requires investment in utility infrastructure. This includes substations, solar systems, battery banks, generation plants, transmission lines, poles, wires, transformers, and the list goes on. As customers rely more on electricity, their tolerance for outages have and will continue to decrease. The challenge lies in placement, as property owners are often resistant to infrastructure in their vicinity. Innovative designs and collaboration will be crucial to overcome this resistance, while considering safety requirements for the design. Placement must strike a balance and consider system design, what existing infrastructure is in place, the regulatory requirements that need to be met, the availability of property, the current and future projected loads, and also the overall cost. In conclusion on this topic, addressing the challenges and opportunities in our electric system design require proactive planning, investment, and a future focus on evolving technologies and customers' needs. It's essential that we continue to adapt to ensure a reliable and resilient electric grid for the future. So before I move on to the discolored water, I'd let you just open it up for any questions you may have. Sorry, that's a lot of words and a lot of information, but wanted to get that all out there for you.
Alderman Stauber?
Thanks for the information, Nick. So considering that the population of Marshfield is relatively the same, just under 20,000, what is your projection for the overall demand in electricity in the next 10, 20 years?
I think,
Percentage-wise, if you could.
yeah, I mean, in a general sense, what we've typically forecast is the 0.5% increase year over year. But obviously that was before EVs, electric vehicles, and electrification. And, all of those have impacts. So I think as we do analysis now, we're working on one now where it'll be more of it'll have a range, right? Expected, and then have a potential lower or higher, just to provide us that bandwidth so we can understand potential. And then as we look at improvements, we understand that there's, what's the probability of the high end versus the low end, and try to take that into consideration. And also, I mean, the other thing that comes in is, right now, working with Josh and others, we're working on that property, the UW property, to get that site certified. What size of load may come to that? It could be a very small one, or it could be pretty large. PCA was a considerable load for us. I know we lost out on a potential customer out in that. We didn't have land available at the time. That would have been a 5 to 10 megawatts, which represents 80 megawatt peak is a considerable percentage. So there's all kinds of development going on, and obviously that we need to keep the lights on and obviously the water flowing.
Thank you.
Alderman Tompkins?
Thank you for this presentation. I have a few questions. Load distribution, do you have a rough estimate of what our minimum and maximum is at the moment?
The maximum is 79. Our minimum is probably somewhere in the 30s to 40s. I mean, those are shoulder times. Basically, I think 2 a.m. on Easter is usually like when we have our lowest load demand. Obviously, it's the weather dependent. We're a summer peaking utility at this point.
And 10 years ago, if you were to think back 10 years ago, what would you think, just off the top of your head, what you think the minimum max was 10 years ago?
Well, the previous peak that we reached actually happened in 2006. And it's changed as you think about it from 2006 till now and what's happened, right? 2008, we had the crash in the housing market. We lost a lot of business, so that reset our demand. 2012, we had the stock market issues that occurred. So all of those have impacts. And so it's kind of a seesaw back and forth. I think overall, though, we're seeing, you have that going on. You have conservation efforts going on. You're changing out high pressure sodium and incandescent light bulbs and turning them into LED. So you're seeing a balance there. I think we're kind of on the tail end of that. I mean, I don't think you can buy incandescent light bulbs anymore at Menards or Hiller's or wherever you shop. So some of those conservation efforts are moving into new areas, and that's where they're talking about heat pumps to replace your traditional furnaces, or changing your stove from gas to electric, and obviously the electric vehicles. So there's a lot of variability, I guess, in looking at a number from a few years ago to the number now and as it goes to the future. The extreme weather events that we just experienced, are they going to continue and get worse, or are they going to subside? So we have to keep all those in our mind as we think about our system and how it's laid out.
So, okay, thank you. So that you're predicting about a 0.5% higher, but of course it does depend on sort of how many people here get electric cars, how fast do they get them, all of that. So you said you were doing an analysis, like, are you still in that process for 10 years from now, what you think the minimum, maximum load will be?
We're right in the front end of that analysis and laying out the framework and trying to incorporate the right partner to do that analysis. But I mean, I think there's a lot of studies that are out there that show different varying results, and we have to consider all those aspects. I think in a neighborhood, as Mike can contest that, it really depends, EVs, if 4 neighbors decide to buy electric vehicles, that's one thing, but then it really comes down to how I use my EV and how he uses his EV and the next person. And we have to have, they call it load management, basically trying to manage that charging so it lessens the impact on the grid. But the 0.5 is just a general historical, that's obviously before EVs and the electrification. And those are the things that we need to start taking into consideration.
Yeah. Sorry, one more question and then a comment. I noticed in one of your minutes that you are applying, I do believe, for a grant to change our streetlights LEDs. How do you think that will affect the load across the city? We have the LED street lamp.
Well, a couple of things on that. We actually did receive the grant, so there's 2 of them. One of them is a focus on energy grant, which actually reduces the purchase price of the LED fixture. So That was something we got this year and were able to use for about 500 fixtures that we purchased. We also got a DOT carbon reduction grant, which covers it's either I believe 70 or 80% of the cost of the fixture and the installation. All of those savings will get passed back to the city through the rates that we charge for streetlights. So that's a long-term savings. And that program has a 4 or 5 year period for us to go through the process of changing them out. As far as the impact on the grid, generally those streetlights are at night and loading is less at night. So as far as, the amount of energy needed will go down, but the capacity of the system, how big the wires have to be, how big the transformer has to be will not be impacted.
Okay, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Any other comments or questions for Nick? Thank you for that report, Nick. Yes,
Right.
sir. You have the water. Yes,
Yep,
sir.
sorry, thank you.
No problem.
So discolored water is a concern for many residents in our community, and it's essential to understand its causes and the actions we've taken to address it. Our water source, originating from an underground aquifer, contains natural occurring minerals, including iron. Over time, these minerals accumulate as sediment in our water mains. To counteract this buildup, our dedicated crews perform annual maintenance by opening hydrants to move water through sections of our water mains at high speeds. This process effectively cleans out the settlement, greatly reducing issues like discolored water from affecting our water system. It's worth noting that this is a practice that's common among many water utilities in the state of Wisconsin. As many of you know, in 2022, we faced a significant challenge when PFAS was detected in some of our wells at levels exceeding the health advisory limits. To prioritize public safety, Marshfield Utilities promptly took action by removing these wells from service. These wells could produce up to 1.2 million gallons of water each day. To ensure uninterrupted water service to our customers, we made operational adjustments that reduced flushing, which is essential for maintaining the water quality, as I mentioned. However, one downside of reducing flushing has been an increase in discolored water events. Historically, when we operated at normal flushing levels, major system events such as a water main break, fire flow tests by private businesses, or firefighting events less frequently led to discolored water events. However, with the reduction in water sources due to the PFAS contamination and subsequent lower flushing levels, we've observed a rise in the frequency and the duration of discolored water incidences. To address these challenges, we've taken some proactive steps. First, we've enhanced our communication. We've increased our communication efforts through social media updates and press releases to try to keep the community informed about our actions and any discolored water events that occur. We've improved our customer support. We've updated our phone system messaging to better assist customers with their inquiries and concerns, ensuring that we can provide prompt assistance when needed. And we've streamlined our complaint tracking internally. We've developed new methods that track customer complaints, enabling us to allocate our resources effectively to resolve issues as quickly as possible. It should be noted that if you experience a discolored water event, we encourage you to report it to our office so we can help pinpoint the area that's being impacted. And then in your home, the recommendation is that you should turn on a cold water tap at the lowest level of your home and run the water until it essentially clears out. That's the best remedy and you'll notice as you drive around, we have hydrants running. That's what we do is we're trying to bring fresh water in, remove the discoloration. Looking ahead with the summer water demand subsiding and the temporary PFAS system construction underway and set to be operational early next year, our staff has initiated some nighttime flushing. We'll continue to monitor our overall system to ensure the health as flushing activities resume. In addition, we have initiated calls to notify customers in areas that we're flushing, and we are actively working on implementing a texting solution as well so that we can give that direct notice to customers. We remain committed to ensuring the safety and quality of our water supply and appreciate your patience and cooperation as we address these challenges.
Any questions or comments? Alderman Werman.
Hey, Nick, thanks for all the extra info and then the additional tips for citizens on the discolored water issues. And now this is just on my own curiosity. I know you mentioned phone calls, possible text messaging. Are we still doing like mailing as well for that kind of notification? Just because I know, especially with the rise in mental health awareness, a lot of people have started diving off social media or at least trying to disconnect a little bit more. And even for residents who just don't have it or refuse to buy in, was that something we're still doing for communication as well?
We do all types of different communication. Definitely if we're in an area and we have to disrupt the service to someone, or if we have a main break, we'll typically do door to door because that's an emergency. We don't have time to prepare. As far as larger events, if there's a fire flow event that causes discoloration, fortunately, by the time we prepared the letter, even if I got it out today, you probably wouldn't get it for 7 to 10 days, just given the fact that the mail's got to go to Wausau or Green Bay or wherever it goes before it actually gets back to your house. So not so much in those situations, if you will. I think the texting solution is something that we have and we're using it in certain applications now, but we're looking to expand it. And I think that's really going to be, hopefully that'll bridge the gap between those that are on social media and those that aren't. And use that not only for water, but also electric, and try to that way our customers would have, immediate information as far as what's going on and hopefully when the issue might be resolved and who they could contact if they had questions.
Sure. And then just in addition for that communication, I know that it's probably in the early stages, but I know communications, specifically Tom had presented a little while back on the City Marshfield app. Is that something that could be integrated as well for people who are on that app? So if there is something going on in their area, you could send some sort of blast like that?
We have an app. It's used it's based on our billing system, how we invoice our customers, and unfortunately the integration, because we're talking about 4 different platforms now, gets challenging. So as you try to get through each one, there's stumbling blocks. But the new platform that we're implementing right now, we think the texting solution should be pretty solid. We have obviously, we encourage customers to update their contact information with us regularly so that we make sure we have the right the information. And then these are not meant to be solicitations. These are not meant to, be bothersome. They're more for FYI, trying to just provide information to customers and hopefully that, it's welcomed.
Sure. Thank you.
Alderman Stauber?
Not to get into story time here, but Nick, are you familiar with the city of Montreal near Hurley, Wisconsin?
I am not.
So it's a small town, actually a city, and named after a Montreal mining company long ago. But they did a test in May of 23. The results were a water test, and results were made available September 19th, and they notified the public on the 20th of September that they had a unacceptable level of manganese in the water. They shut the entire water system down. And to Derek's point, there was a lot of concern. It's a small community, a lot of elderly, that the communications weren't good, weren't effective. They posted on their website and said that was adequate, but there were no door hangers or anything like that. So I guess I'm kind of asking if you don't know anything about it, but to me, it seems like a case study, both in DNR response times and also community communications or lack of communication. And the people are pretty distraught. So they're bringing in bottled water for these people, for everything.
Right.
But it's just a bad situation. And I think the community is maybe 800, 900 people total, but without water. So.
Yeah, across the state, there's a number of communities that are dealing with PFAS and trying to figure out how they're going to make steps forward so that they can, provide water that's meeting the requirements. And to both your points, communication is obviously very, is key. You have to get the word out some way, somehow, and trying to connect with everyone is challenging because there's so many different platforms and so many different ways. But definitely something we continue to look to improve on.
Anyone else? Thank you very much, Nick. Thank you for that report.
Thank you.
I'm going to do something a little different this evening with the employee recognition. Bob Larson is here this evening. Bob, would you please come forward? Can't say no to the mayor. Well, you could, but it wouldn't be good.
He's in uniform too.
Absolutely. I've been mayor for 1.5 years now, and I've never had the honor of congratulating a 30-year veteran of the police department, of any department in Marshfield. Jess has informed me there have been 40-year people, but that was before my time. And since Bob is here, Bob, congratulations. I've known Bob all of my life.
Sure have.
I'm not sure if that's good or not, but yes, it is. And obviously, everything that you've done, everything that you're going to do, we are very proud of you.
Thank you.
And Bob, thank you again. Thank you for your wife coming. And everybody, let's give him a hand.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
I'm sorry, I forgot it at home. Oh, darn it. Tune in next week. No council meeting.
Yeah.
Okay, item H, council comments. Seeing none, moving on to item I, city administrator's update.
Yeah, just a couple things tonight, both related to meetings. Just a reminder that there's a joint meeting of the council and the Fire and Police Commission. It'll be a week from tomorrow night, Wednesday, October 4th at 5:30 p.m. It's currently scheduled for the 2nd Street Community Center. We are evaluating some issues with sound and logistics there, but there'll be an update if we do move it, but that's the intent right now, to meet in that building, in the Drendel Room. And then also the CDA is having a special meeting tomorrow at 1:30 here at City Hall. The reason I note it is because they're talking about the 2nd Street Corridor Project, the West 2nd Street redevelopment plan. Vanderwall consulting firm that worked with us on putting the plan together and now is looking to possibly help us on implementation will be there as well, sort of evaluating the CDA's readiness to be part of this project if it moves forward. So I just wanted the council to know that continued discussions are going on the West 2nd Street redevelopment plan. That's all I've got tonight.
Thank you, Steve. Item J, reports from commissions, boards, and committees. Seeing none, move on to item K, consent agenda. Motion by Alderman Werman, second by Alderman Fire. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote.
Mr. Wagner,
Yes.
Mr. Giles,
Yes.
Mrs. Spiros,
Yes.
Mr. Rigel.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. And we can skip item L because we have no action to remove. Item M, election of utility commissioner for the citizen appointment to a 7-year term on Marshfield Utilities Commission, presented by me. We have 2 candidates, Chris Mikulski and Nick Paschal. And if somebody from the floor would please nominate these 2 individuals. Motion by Alderman Stauber, second by Alderman Varsho.
I
Can we
would.
verify? Thank
So I'll nominate Mr. Chris Mikulski for the position.
And then Andrew seconds, and then, yep.
Written ballot?
You will have a written ballot, yes. Typically, we have nominations for both candidates and 1 motion. If you'd like to do it differently, we can definitely do that.
It'll be a long meeting waiting for Wagner.
Any other nominations from the floor? Rebecca? Mrs. Spiros?
I will nominate Nick Paschal.
Nomination made by Rebecca Spiros for Nick Paschal. Is there a second? Alderman O'Reilly? So we have our 2 candidates. Yes.
So if you'll please vote to accept those nominations. Mr. Wagner, Mr. Wagner, do you support nominating both candidates? I think you're muted. Mrs. Spiros,
Yes.
Mr. Giles. Mr. Giles, you were muted as well.
Yes.
Mr. Rigel
Yes.
and Mr. Wagner.
No.
Okay, motion proves 9-1. Now Jess is going to hand out the ballots.
I just want to add, while the voting's going on, I forgot to mention this, but I talked about the joint meeting of the council and the Fire and Police Commission on Wednesday. It's regarding the possibility of accepting a donation. Actually, it's about a study to look at the feasibility of a property in the south end for a new police station. And the consultant will be presiding. I should have said that when I was mentioning a special meeting, so you had some idea what the topic of the meeting was about.
They do. It's not a secret ballot. Mr. Wagner, your vote?
My vote, I vote for the gentleman nominated by Mr. Stauber.
Is that Mr. Mikulski? Just need to say it. Oh.
Yeah.
Mr. Giles?
I said yes.
Right, Mr. Giles.
Mr. Peschel, please.
Mrs. Spiros?
Nick Paschal.
Mr. Rigel?
Mr. Mikulski.
Absolutely. We have a tie vote, and as mayor, I will break the tie and vote for Nick Paschal. Item N, election of utilities commissioners for 2 common council appointments and assignment for 1 5-year term and 1 6-year term. And Jess is going to walk you through how this vote is going to come forth, because we have 2 council members and we have to vote which one of them is going to go the 5-year, which one's going to go the 6-year. That's the only fair way to do it as you as a council, because you are voting on these 2 individuals. Okay? So Jess, if you wouldn't mind doing that?
Sure. So in consultation with the council president, Mr. Wagner, and with the city attorney, we went over options you had for how this vote could occur with 2 candidates, Ms. Tompkins and Mr. O'Reilly, and 2 openings. It's fair to say those are your candidates. So now we need to assign the term lengths and officially appoint them as your representatives. So the suggestion of Mr. Wagner is that we have a nomination, first off, for both candidates to officially accept them as your candidates. Then I would hand out the paper ballot. Next to their name on the line, you would either write a 5 or a 6 to assign them to either the 5-year term or the 6-year term. So unless anyone has discussion, that was the plan Mr. Wagner was most comfortable with. I think this.
Alderman Spiros? Alderman Spiros?
I'll nominate both Alderperson Tompkins and Alderperson O'Reilly to serve as the council representatives of the Utility Commission.
And second by Alderman Rigel. Any discussion? Seeing none, please vote to accept the nomination and the second.
Mr. Wagner?
O'Reilly.
Mr. Giles?
Yes.
Mrs. Spiros,
Very funny.
Yes.
Mr.
Yes.
Weigel.
Yes. I'm having difficulty hearing them over here. I don't know what's going on, but something's wrong with the audio.
No, but so
Okay,
that's
okay, that's grand. So that motion passes. Now remember again, you're voting for 1 for 5 and 1 for 6. Natasha, since you abstained, is that true, since she abstained? I'm not sure. Hap, is that? I'm just posing the question. Okay, just want to make sure, because we want to make sure everything is on the up and up. Yeah. Well.
Mr. Wagner, who would you like for the 5-year term, Ms. Tompkins or Mr. O'Reilly?
Mr. Compton,
And is that Mr. O'Reilly then for the 6-year term?
yes.
And Mr. Giles?
Mr. O'Reilly for the 5-year, please.
And Ms. Tompkins for the 6-year?
Correct.
Mrs. Spiros?
O'Reilly for 6. Tompkins for 5.
Mr. Weigel?
O'Reilly for 5, Tompkins for 6.
The decision by the council has been made. Mike O'Reilly will be 5 years and Natasha Tompkins will be 6 years. Thank you for your votes and thank you. Item O, request to approve budget resolution.
Excuse me, Mayor.
Oh, I apologize.
I
Yes, sir.
just wanted to thank Mr. Mikulski for coming forward and offering to help with the Marshfield Utility Commission. And I would also say that there are a lot of opportunities to serve, and you've got a lot of experience, education that we could benefit from. So thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. He stole my thunder, but that's okay. On to item O, request to approve budget resolution number 25-2023, debt service transfer to EMS for levy principal and interest payments presented by Jennifer Solinsky, Finance Director.
Good evening. Back in 2023, we decided for the first time to levy the principal and interest payments for the EMS portion of debt service due to the inability of that fund user fees to pay for that service. Up until that time, the fees, the principal and interest had been paid through fees. So 2023 was the first year that we needed to change the course of direction. The funding source for this payment is tax levy, and that is recorded in our debt service fund, while the payment actually occurs in the EMS fund. So this budget resolution follows the intent of our budget in making the payment from the fund itself. So with that, I would ask for council approval of budget resolution 2523 to transfer monies from the debt service fund to the EMS fund to make its principal and interest payments.
We have a motion by Alderman Fire, second by Alderman Tompkins. And discussion, Alderman Tompkins?
Thank you, Jennifer. So we did do this approval through finance, budget, and personnel. And at that time, I did raise the question of this is a new thing that debt is now being put for the EMS station, portion of the station is now being put onto the Marshfield citizens. So I would just request that we dig a little deeper and just make sure that we know all the different pots of service fees, any of our CIP equipment, anything that potentially is no longer being carried by the EMS fund, but now has been put onto our debt service or our tax levy. And then to even go a little further and to say per capita, each citizen in Marshfield is paying a certain amount for EMS service, and then to look out at the townships and just say how much is one person in the township, just to make sure that there's a fairness of sharing that burden, the cost burden, because I don't think we've ever looked at that. So that's just something I would request that we have, especially since we're probably going to be seeing this again in the budget, where we need to put this portion of the EMS back onto our taxes.
How would you like to see this data? Would you like this just as a special report emailed to you individually, the body, as part of the budget document, a separate item?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it would be great if we could get the information before the budget, before we need to approve the budget. And if everyone on the council just could get that information, I think that would be helpful, just so that we have it.
Certainly.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we have a motion and a second. Any other comments, questions? Seeing none, please vote.
Mr. Wagner,
Aye.
Mr. Giles,
Yes.
Mrs. Spiros,
Yes.
Mr. Rigel.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you.
Thank you.
Item P, first reading of ordinance number 1501, amending section 2-1073 of City of Marshfield Municipal Code to provide for requests for advisory options from the Ethics Board, presented by Harold Wolfgram, City Attorney.
You have in front of you ordinance 1501. The statute already provides that an ethics board has the authority to give a confidential opinion as an advisory opinion to public officials or persons that have business with the city. But just to clarify this, our code provision previously referenced ethics opinions, but didn't, or advisory opinions, but didn't incorporate all of the details from the statute. So this really just adopts almost word for word the provisions of the statute that allows a person to do that. And for clarification on how that works is that anyone that has business with the city, whether that be a public official or that it be some other contractor or otherwise, can come to the board and ask for an advisory opinion, which remains confidential. And this ordinance gathers up those provisions in the statute that make it very clear that that's a confidential opinion that restricts even the name of the individual asking for it. The only caveat to that is that when a member of a body, and in particular this applies to the Common Council, were to perhaps have someone that is a candidate, but they have questions about ethics, we've had that issue arise here, where the member of the body could actually ask for an ethics opinion related to the relationship of that person or something they have that might create an ethics question. So that can be done there where the request is actually being made by a member of the body. This has come up again because there's been times where that's been raised, and I've cautioned we want to be careful how we do that because the statute makes it very clear that that's a confidential, private analysis that doesn't disclose otherwise. So it's not like that information comes back specifically to the body, meaning the governing body itself. But in any event, that's what the ordinance is. This is first reading, so there's no action anticipated here, and it'll come back for a second reading later.
Thank you. Any questions for HAP? Seeing none, item Q, first reading of ordinance number 1502, amending section 18-6611, temporary uses, farmers markets to allow food trucks at farmers markets, presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. Earlier this year, the question was raised about why food trucks are not allowed to be part of farmers markets. Councilmember O'Reilly actually brought this forward at the June Plan Commission and asked that we look at the zoning code requirements related to food trucks at farmers markets. Upon review, if you take a look at the code, it's very clear about farmers markets, what they allow, and I'll just read it from the current code. It says it will include the temporary or occasional outdoor retail sales of farm produce, if I can say it, plants and flowers, bakery goods, and or crafts from vehicles or temporary stands located within a public right-of-way or parking lot. So there's no reference to food trucks, and that really is the issue, is that food trucks are, unlike in other cities, they're not called out as a purpose allowed in our farmers markets. So the simple sole purpose of this ordinance would be to add a sentence that says food trucks are permitted with property owner's signature and applicable City of Marshfield licenses, putting that sentence within the paragraph that talks about farmers markets. I should note again, I said this at the Plan Commission meeting, that again, Jessica, our city clerk, is involved with the licensing, and also the fire department gets involved in terms of the safety issues with the preparation of food, grills, smokers, those kind of things. So those requirements still need to be met by someone who wants to operate a food truck within a farmer's market. But with that in mind, that is the ordinance to allow food trucks within farmers markets with those criteria. And this is for first reading, and so no action is requested. We would put this on the agenda for the October 10th meeting, but I would take any questions at this time.
Alderman O'Reilly.
Thank you. The only question I really had on it that didn't strike me until after I read this a second time is the food trucks are being required to have written permission from the landowner. Is that the same case with all vendors? And if it's not, could somebody explain why that additional step is in there for them, please?
Yeah, I don't remember that actually coming up per se at Plan Commission or in the development of it. I think the idea is to make sure that they don't just stumble in and invite themselves where they see, people selling farm goods or, fruit and vegetables and stuff. But we can certainly check on that between the two readings, why that was, okay, go for it. Because I don't recall how that came about, maybe in talking with Bryce and others you do know.
Right. That is not unlikely for any of our special events. We do require a list from all sponsoring organizations. So that's why this was incorporated. Farmers markets were really, in reality right now, talking about a small vendor event at Pick and Save currently and the larger event at Festival. So they just have to acknowledge that they're aware of who is there, what the requirements are, and that sort of releases the property owner from the liability of the vendor being asked to leave if they haven't complied. So that sort of removes them from the equation.
It still does raise the concern you're asking, though. I mean, somebody wants to come in and sell fruits and vegetables. They may be required to get the property owner's permission, but it doesn't actually say that in the current code. So it's a good question. Maybe we can look at clearing up to make sure that it's one and the same across the board.
Go ahead, Jess.
That is addressed in licensing as well in all of Chapter 9, which is currently going through a complete rewrite, but that is also addressed and again is similar for all traveling businesses.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Item R, first reading of ordinance number 1503, updating the Marshfield High School and Madison Elementary School Campus Master Plan, presented by Steve Barg, City Administrator.
Thank you, Mayor. Well, you've seen these before in our various campuses across the city, fairgrounds, the airport, the medical complex, the education complex on the west end, where we want to have a 5-year plan. And just to kind of recap why, that's where they're telling us what they expect to see development occur in the next 5 years, whether it be buildings, parking lots, anything that would change the area that those campuses operate in, so that we could plan and be ready for any public improvements that are needed and the expectations that will come in terms of any permits or anything that comes from what they intend to do. So we're talking about, as the mayor mentioned, we're talking about the school district, we're talking about the high school and Madison Elementary. This would update the plan that was originally approved back in 2018, and it calls out new projects. I'll just kind of touch on them on page 2 of your packet. The ones that they're looking at in the next 5 years, The high school includes the main office relocation, technology education expansion in the area of the location of the existing cell tower in North Wing, commons expansion to expand food service, traffic circle reconfiguration, expansion, modifying the existing loading dock, and a laundry list of things. I won't even read them all, but these are things that they expect to see between now and 2028. And as part of this plan, if you saw in your packet, it addresses things like parking, landscaping, anything that involves the development of the campus where the school district operates. At Plan Commission, there really was only one topic discussed at any length at all, and that was the intent to move the communications tower from next to the building over to either the east or the west side of the campus, the property. There was a thought as maybe, I think a couple of commissioners wonder if maybe we didn't look at the west side, because the east side location would be next to the pickleball court. The representative from the school district made it pretty clear that the east side is desirable for a couple of different reasons, and that would be their preferred site. It's farther away from the building, which gives more clear zone, and a safety issue is averted a little bit that way. So apart from that particular issue, the Planning Commission saw this very favorably, and they recommend it for approval as presented by the school district. And again, this is first reading, so no action expected. Second reading will be on October 10th.
Alderman O'Reilly?
Thank you again. I had brought up in Plan Commission, I don't know if it's a concern, but I think it should be documented. Nobody seemed to really know what was on these towers, and I don't know a lot about it, but I've heard a lot of people with concerns on 5G and the new type of stuff going out. And I just want, I guess, it was addressed at that time more on a structural integrity of these towers. But I just want to make sure that if we're moving these towers closer to homes, that somehow this doesn't incorporate that, and we have some very upset homeowners. Mm-hmm. So I don't know how that would be addressed, but I think it should be addressed what's on them, and maybe a little deeper look on the replacement or, relocation of them.
I think the representation that was made that night was that it's currently right next to the school building, and they're not seeing any negativity to their electronics or anything else, but it's a question that we could ask again and see if there's anything that would give a greater comfort to the fact that it won't affect others in the neighborhood, especially if it's moved closer to the residential area. But I think they did report that they're not seeing anything in their existing facilities, and it's right next to them.
Alderman Stauber?
Thank you, Mayor. So my only concern when looking at the map was pedestrian safety. And Becker Road is County Trunk Y, and I think it might be a major arterial. And I just want to make sure that the city is in lockstep with any changes in traffic patterns of the students from one location to another, considering the fact that you're going to have student drivers coming through there, and there will be a cost. And again, I'm kind of winging it here because I'm not sure if they have pedestrian activated crossing lights there. So that to me seems like a nice feature. There are going to be a lot of pedestrians.
The city actually has timed lights that go on at a certain time of day that flash in that area of the middle school and senior high there, or Madison School and senior high. They did complete with the construction of the football stadium and the improvements that they created there. We had them do a traffic impact analysis, and from that we did implement, I think, majority of recommendations from that analysis with the school district.
Anyone else have any questions? Thank you, Tom, for that. Item S, request to authorize local pickleball group to raise funds for Brain Park Courts, working with Park and Recreation staff and Marshfield Area Community Foundation, presented by Justin Casperson, Parks and Recreation Director.
Good evening. You heard this earlier this evening from Perry Stargart, one of the individuals that's a main driver behind the pickleball courts and their organization. There's a large group of them, very passionate. They recently been organized, so they have a board of directors, and they opened up a local account with a bank to kind of help with their funding. and they have all sorts of people. Michelle Bornke, if you guys are familiar with Michelle, she was a longtime employee with the university who's involved and a main driver behind this. But they want to go out in the community and raise private dollars and sponsorship dollars on behalf of the project to kind of keep the pickleball courts moving forward. We've been working with them now for over a year on just design and ideas on the pickleball courts. But before they can go out into the community, they should really get approval from the body or the city as a whole to seek dollars, if you will, on behalf of the project. So tonight, you heard a little bit from them, but tonight we're looking for approval from this body for that group to go out and seek fundraising sponsorship dollars. They are working with our department on that method and what they're doing. And they also have a fund set up with the community foundation and got approval from that board to set the dollars aside for that. This will be very similar to like the pool project or any other project that we've done in the past. It's just great that they're coming forward and kind of taking the ball, sorry for the pun, and running with it. On a side note, related to pickleball, the city did receive $10,000 grant from the community foundation to be put towards pickleball court. We did also receive a grant from the county, which hasn't been finalized. They'll do that later this year for $50,000 for pickleball. So it seems everything is pickleball right now in our department.
Marvelous. We have a motion by Alderman Tompkins, second by Alderman Varsho. Alderman O'Reilly?
Thank you. Yeah, I think this is fantastic involvement from the community. I love to see the passion on something healthy. I will fully support this and spread the word.
Anyone else comments? Alderman Tompkins?
I too think this is fantastic. My one suggestion would be that there be a fund with a community foundation so that 10 years from now when we need to redo those surfaces, we have the money.
Yeah, that's their intent too. Not only are they talking short term, meaning the project itself, but then setting aside some dollars like endowment for those resurfacing of those courts or new nets or new windscreens or whatever that might be. They're thinking proactively. And that's primarily coming from Michelle, who's been, I don't want to say around the block, but she's retired and she's enjoying it. So just a update on the pickleball courts. We're in design right now. We're hoping to get construction documents finalized to go out to bid. That'll go to Board of Public Works, hopefully in the next 30 to 60 days. We are going to try to solicit and retain bids this fall. If we have favorable weather conditions, we'll start construction this fall. But we also understand it could be cold and really freezing by November 1st. So we're going to play it by ear. I know, don't say that, right? But just that's the schedule with pickleball, and we're probably going to try to do it together with softball too. Those are our two projects we're looking at doing for the next 2 years at that facility.
Alderman Ragel.
Thank you. Just one, maybe two questions here. What authority does this group have then if we authorize this?
They would go out and solicit funds on behalf of the project.
Okay, but they couldn't promise naming rights or anything else along those lines or above and beyond,
Yeah,
could they?
They would allow naming rights or naming rights of the courts or naming of this or that. They would go out and solicit that. That is part of the package, if you will. So they have various, like a paver might be $100, a court might be $10,000, naming rights might be $100,000. So there's like a package deal where they will give out those types of things. Like we had with the pool, one was naming rights, and that was Mid-State Truck, or the Van de Hey family took that opportunity.
Okay, then just both of these are mainly for my peace of mind here more than anything, but essentially we'd be asking them to fill in this role, but there wouldn't be any overlap as far as anyone from the city seeking any additional funding or anything like that, correct?
Right, but yes, essentially they're the ones that'll be out in the community actually doing the conversations. They're the boots on the ground, if you will. Our staff doesn't have time, nor are we structured to go out and do the private fundraising.
Right, I just, like I said, my only thing was I didn't want them promising one person or organization one thing, and then, basically I want the left hand knowing what the right hand's doing. That's all, but it sounds like that's taken care of, so thank you, appreciate it.
Alderman Wagner?
Yes, ma'am. I'd like to advise the Parks and Recreation Department as well as the Common Council that they requested these funds from the SEED Committee, Economic Development portion. And the Operations Committee reviewed their budget last week, and they're 200 and some odd % over budget. So we sent it back to them for review to bring it back into line. So there's going to be a meeting with it. They haven't called it yet, but I think Mr. Casperson's going to get a call from them and ask to come again before the SEED Committee again. And so it's not the money from the county is not a done deal at this point.
Anyone else have any comments or questions? Alderman Werman?
I just had one, Justin. I think this is a fantastic initiative. I did want to know for future maintenance, I know we talked about like taking care of the courts, but I assume there will be trash cans or something set up here just in order to keep these grounds nice. Is that something that your group will include in like their maintenance rounds or anything to upkeep?
Yeah, Brain Park is the most popular park in our park system for lunches, if you will. We have a lot of people grabbing a lunch from the local restaurants and eating it at Brain Park, so we have almost a daily stop there to empty trash cans. So,
and just one more, if you don't mind too. I know we've had some vandalism issues in the past year or longer. Being a newer area, will there be any kind of security here, especially being close to the skate park and things like that, where there's a lot of hangouts going on?
yeah, part of the project will have some sort of surveillance or security cameras set up that are operational 24/7.
Awesome, thank you.
Anyone else? We have a motion and a second. Please vote.
Mr. Wagner,
Aye.
Mr. Giles,
Yes.
Mrs. Spiros,
Yes.
Mr. Rigel,
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. One more great thing for Marshfield. Item T, report on the status of active TIF districts presented by Josh Miller, Cedar Corporation.
Good evening. I think this is looking for the PowerPoint. All right. Is that, all right, thank you. Hello, as you said, my name is Josh Miller. I'm with Cedar Corporation. I'm a senior planner, and I've been assisting the city with creating the Tax Incremental Finance District number 14. Prior to that, though, thought it'd be a good opportunity to kind of give the council a little bit of background on TIF. I think it's been at least 2 years since the city has created its last TIF district, and there's a number of new alderpersons on here. So it'd be a good little introduction to TIF, and then we were going to talk about the status of the existing TIF districts in Marshfield, so you can get an overview of where they are, what they're doing, how they're doing. This is an annual report that is provided to the Joint Review Board, and I'll discuss that in a little bit. But we'll get started here. So you hear the terms TIF and TID, and what do they mean? They're often interchangeable, but they mean slightly different things. TIF is the mechanism for the financing. It's tax incremental financing. And a TID is the actual district that we'd be proposing to create. For example, TID 14 later tonight. So that's the actual district, but people use them often interchangeably. So when you're creating a TIF, you are looking at a couple of things. First of all, it's a land area that you're looking at. It's an area of a community. And you establish a base value, which basically looks at, you carve out the district, and then you look at what the current assessed value is of the district. That value is essentially frozen, and all the taxing jurisdictions get to collect their taxes that have been created on the value up to that point. Once that district is created, any new value that happens within that district, all the taxes go to the city to help pay for project costs. So the taxing entities that are involved are the school district, the county, the technical school, and the city in this case. So prior to any other property outside of TIF, the taxing jurisdictions get their share. But once you create the TIF, a new increment is generated. So new value, new development happens. the city gets to collect the taxes on that. So that's when we look at the difference between base value and tax increment. So this is just an example. You look at let's assume that, I'll go back a second. Let's assume that there's 50 acres assessed at $100,000. The mill rate is $20 per $1,000 of value. The total taxes would be $2,000 just on that land. That would all get distributed to the 4 taxing entities that I mentioned. Let's say we put the 50 acres into a new TIF, and a project goes in that's $330,000. The new taxes on that would be $6,600 would go towards the city, and the $2,000 would still go to the remaining taxing entities. So the city gets to collect the money on the new increment. And this is just an illustration showing that bottom green line is the base value, and then the green triangle there, that's the new increment based on the new property value. So in Marshfield, or in all cities in the state, you're limited to 12% of your equalized value for existing increment of existing TIF districts and the base value that you're proposing to create. So in Marshfield's case, we have over $2 billion worth of equalized value in the city. And we currently have over $120 million of value in increment in the TIF districts. So that basically leaves about $131 million that the city could use as a base value for any new TIF district. So that's there's a lot of room in the city for that, but it also shows that there's been a lot of increments generated in the past. So the TIF districts have generated a lot of value. In addition to the property taxes, you also include personal property up until January 1 of 24. So right now that's included in the number. Starting January 1 of 2024, most of personal property goes away for that purpose. Here, I'm sorry. So one of the things you have to ask yourself when you're creating a TIF district and when you're providing assistance for a development is whether or not to provide assistance. And so you look at it's called the but-for test. It's kind of as a legalese term, I think, that attorneys like to use, but it's a technical term that if not for the development or but for the TIF district, the creation of the TIF district, the development wouldn't happen as proposed. So it's called the but-for test, meaning that if the district wasn't created, the development wouldn't happen as it's proposed. That doesn't mean that no development would happen. It's just because it's like saying we have a crystal ball and over 20 years, nothing would happen unless we create a TIF. Well, there could be some development, but it certainly wouldn't be to the extent that is identified in the project plan. So some of the projects that are eligible or some of the costs that are eligible in TIF would be site improvements, land acquisition, assistance for parking lots, street lights, infrastructure, sewer, water, equipment, sidewalks, demolition, things like that. Those are all eligible TIF costs. And when you put together a project plan, the state gives you a laundry list of things that you can choose from. And you can put a lot of things in there, but then you have to assign a cost and you have to show that there's a financial feasibility analysis that's completed as part of that to ensure that, yes, we have these projects that we're going to do, but we're going to show that there's development that's going to support it. So in providing assistance, there's a couple different methods. There's the traditional financing where the city goes out and takes out a bond, borrows some money to do some infrastructure project. That usually you wouldn't want to see that happen unless there's some development that's either imminent or is commenced. And usually you do that with a development agreement. The other option is a pay-as-you-go. So you wait until a development happens, they pay the taxes, and then the city gives them a reimbursement. This is similar to the mall that was the development agreement that was approved last year. And historically, Marshfield has done a lot of upfront traditional financing. They're shifting more towards the pay-go because it's less risk to the city, and it shares the risk with the developer. And there's a combination of the two. So you could also do a mix where you provide some assistance upfront, either in infrastructure or some kind of developer cash grant or site improvements, and then the remaining balance could be a pay-as-you-go throughout the life of the TIF. Touch on this, you want to reduce your risk, obviously, so you have a development agreement. You want to make sure that there's specified duties in there, what's the city responsible to do, what's the developer responsible to do. You want to set up a minimum assessed value usually, or some kind of a percent of the, if you're doing a pay-go, you can set it up as some kind of a percent of the taxes that are paid. And you want to make sure that the deliverables are clear to all parties. You want to, this slide is kind of relevant to TID 5, what the city did back in the early 2000s. You want to refrain from over-investing in constructing public infrastructure without the development being in hand. So the city, and it ended up working out well for the city, but there was a lot of infrastructure put in for Mill Creek Business Park, and that had sat empty or sat relatively empty for a number of years. The state allowed what's called a distress designation, which allowed the expansion of the extension of the life of the TIF. But regardless, a lot of communities were in the same boat. They bought land, they bought farmland, wanted to put an industrial park in. They put in the infrastructure and nothing happened. And so you obviously that's something the city's not in a financial position to do, but just something, word of caution, just something to keep in mind when you're looking at creating a TIF and providing assistance. But you also want to try to offset those costs with grants. In some cases, if you do special assessments, there's ways to reduce the city's burden in a TIF. As of April 16th of this past year, there were 1,390 active TIFs in the state. Really, this is the only tool that the municipalities have for economic development. There's obviously grants and other things like that, but you can see there's almost 1,400. That's a lot throughout the state. And each state, a lot of states have these TIF districts, but they all work slightly different. And the different types of districts that you can create are a blighted or a rehabilitation district. That's the one we have in TID 4. That's our downtown TIF. An industrial TIF district, which is what we have in TID 5, which is our Mill Creek Business Park. A mixed-use TIF district, which is TID 13, and that allows a mix of commercial, residential, industrial development, and newly platted residential, and then an environmental TIF, which provides for remediation options, which we don't have in the city right now. So when we talk about a mixed-use TIF, and I'll get into this a little bit more when we're talking TID 14, but the mixed-use TIF allows the city to incur costs for newly platted residential development. It's the only TIF that allows for that. So what that means is basically if you're having a new subdivision development, the city can provide assistance for infrastructure or assistance to the developer to develop that land for housing. Housing is obviously one of the more important issues that we see the city's facing. Every community in the state is facing that situation, a lack of housing, both affordable and just market rate. This tool allows you to provide assistance to develop land for newly platted residential with a couple of caveats. And mostly that's going to be that you can't do a low density subdivision. You have to have at least three dwelling units per acre averaged out for the newly platted area. So the creation process is notice to taxing entities, and that goes to your joint review board members, and including the joint review board is a member at large, which is voted on by the joint review board. And then you have a public hearing with the plan commission. The council would adopt the resolution to create, and then the last and final step is the joint review board has the last kick at the can, basically, whether or not a district gets created. They don't get to make changes to the project plan, but they would say, yes or no. We have a scheduled joint review board meeting for the TID 14 creation in a couple of days. But they have the final say. If they deny it, they have to provide you a written basis as to why they denied it based on a certain criteria. Any questions on TIF overall? I know that's quick. It's a lot of information. Maybe it's boring, but it's all right.
Alderman Stauber.
Back on slide number 12, you talked about the different types of tax incremental districts, and you mentioned the fourth one, environmental. I wasn't aware of that one, and I'm wondering what that would look like. What would be the source of revenue to help pay down or retire the expenditure, and how it might apply to a city like Marshfield?
Well, I think, and to be honest, I haven't dealt with an environmental TIF. They're not nearly as common as like you see industrial or blighted or even mixed use now. But I can see in an environmental situation, it's going to be probably a brownfield or contamination site where you're doing some cleanup. in that case, you may or may not have a development agreement in place or somebody helping out. You just have an issue in your community that you know needs to be cleaned up. So the same project costs are eligible, remediation, demolition, things like that. But it's basically focused on trying to clean up a specific site. And then the increment would generally be for when something happens, when something develops, getting it clean to an acceptable brownfield site that can be developed.
So would the revenue come in the form of grants for that? Or?
Well, eventually it'd come in the form of tax base that's created once the site's cleaned up. So it would be in the future. Now you could have somebody, let's say the developer's coming in and let's say West 2nd Street, for example, and there's some contamination issues. And a developer said, I'm ready to come, willing to come here, but we need a TIF district assistance and we need some cleanup to happen before that. That would be the case where you'd use an environmental TIF.
Okay, thank you.
Alderman Tompkins?
Thanks so much for this. I just noticed you said a TEA grant for roads. Could you tell us what that is?
Yeah, it's a transportation economic assistance or enhancement. I'm not good at acronyms always, but it's with the Department of Transportation. So it's going to be based on, I think the number is $5,000 per job created or retained. They can help offset for strictly for road construction. And stormwater management of that road that's developed. So if you're creating let's say you're building out a road and you've got sewer, water, sanitary, that the sewer and water and other stuff can't be paid for with this. It's just strictly the road portion. It's a 50-50 cost share with the DOT, but it's and then there's usually a job guarantee commitment from a business that's going to go there or relocated and that needs to be served by that infrastructure. So it's a program we use. The challenge with that program is it can be a 12 to 18 month implementation process from start to finish. There's a lot of environmental steps. There's a lot of, you're usually looking at wetlands, you're looking at, native species, and sensitive species, things like that. Sometimes there's a tribal notification that goes out. So things can really get stuck in that process a bit. So it's not always conducive for a development that wants to happen in the short period, but it is a revenue source for infrastructure.
Any questions for Josh? No, it was not boring. Thank you, Josh.
All right, I'll keep going. So this is the next phase of this was actually the agenda item is the overview of the TIF districts. And so we'll just talk through. So TID 4, as I mentioned, this is the downtown TIF district. This is the blighted TIF or redevelopment TIF. And it was created in 1996. The expenditure period has ended. So there's two steps in the TIF. There's an expenditure period and then there's a termination of a TIF district. And usually most of the TIFs that we look at are about 20 years, the maximum life, and then you get 15 years to spend money. And the reason that you don't get the full time to spend the money is you have to have some time to recoup your investment. So that last 5 years, the state requires that and you can close a TIF early, but usually it's 15 years for the expenditure period and then 20 years to terminate. In this case, this is a downtown or a blighted TIF, a redevelopment TIF, and I think it's a 27, depending on when they started, they have different time lengths, but they range from 27 to 23 years, depending on when they were created. So a blighted TIF or a redevelopment TIF has a little longer lifetime because it doesn't have the greenfield development, which would generate more increment. So you're looking at redevelopment projects, which is a little bit less lucrative, I guess, or is less beneficial to add that increment. But anyways, back to the fund balance. There's about $870,000 in the current fund balance. Outstanding debt is just under $5 million. So you have a $4.1 million left to collect. The annual increment is just over $1 million. So if you do the math, the district could close out in 2028. So it's right now it's a donor district, and so this is a couple years old, but the old city hall was put back on the tax roll a couple years ago. So right now the increment exceeds the debt requirements, looking to reforecast and monitor as time goes on. Things could obviously change with the 2nd Street corridor. If that gets going, a lot of that land is in the TIF. So you'd be looking at, if it's an overlay district or you know, if you're taking land out of a TIF, that could have an impact on the payoff. One thing I'll mention here, and we talk about it later, but it is a candidate for affordable housing extension. So what that is at the end of the life of before the TIF can terminate, a municipality can extend the life for one more year, and they can capture 1 year worth of increment to use for affordable housing. At least 75% of that increment has to be used for affordable housing. The other 25% can be used for improvement of the municipality's housing stock. So if you look at the number of about $1 million, that's just one TIF. But if this TIF closes early, that is, if that legislation is still active, that's something that the city could use to help with housing down the road. Before I keep going, I just want to thank Jennifer, your finance director. She provided this information for us. So this wasn't Cedar Corporation. This is your wonderful staff. TIF number 5, which is the Mill Creek Industrial Park. It was identified as distressed back in 2011. It was created in 1997, and the end of the expenditure period was in 2015. So the last 2 districts we talk about, there's no money that can be spent on those districts from the general fund or from the actual district itself. It has a negative fund balance right now. It has an outstanding debt of $268,000. So there's a little over about $550,000 left to collect. With increment though of $630,000 a year, looks to be paid off next year. So that would be a TIF district that could close early. And that would be phenomenal. That would be good to have that close early. The Joint Review Board appreciates that. And this would be an opportunity to either do an affordable housing extension or put that money back into on the tax roll. One of the things I didn't mention, the distressed district, I guess I kind of touched on that a little bit. The Business Incentive Fund, though, that is still active in TID 5. So that was a fund that prior to the expenditure period ending, the city contributed or put in an escrow fund to the county about, I think, $400,000 at the time. And that money was to be used to help assist with business development for the remaining life of the TIF. So once that money is outside the city's hands, even though the expenditure period ended, it's kind of a workaround that you can continue to spend money. There's a guidebook that's being followed, and I think there's like 140,000 left in that fund. So if something came up real quick, the city would still have some money available to do that. It's a creative way to kind of around the expenditure period, something to think about as you get closer to other ones. Yellowstone Industrial TIF, TID. This is also a distressed TIF. This includes the PCA, Quality Tank Solutions, Silvercoat, and so on. Created in 2001. The end of the expenditure period was in 2019. Again, no more expenditure period. The last termination date, because it's distressed, is 2034. There's a current fund balance of almost $670,000, outstanding debt of about $5 million. But with the remaining increment or annual increment of about $800,000, the district does anticipate an early closure. This is also one where there's currently a positive cash flow. And again, if the city would be interested, they could do the affordable housing extension based on the last year of increment. So you start adding these up, you get, $600,000, $800,000, $1 million. Eventually, you're starting to see money that can come online to assist with housing for affordable housing. TID number 9 is a Forward Bank. It's a blighted TIF. This includes the Forward Bank area, the Burger King, Dunkin' Donuts. Most of this is developed already. And it was created in 2013. The expenditure period is ending in 2035 with the last termination of 2040. There is a positive fund balance, about $2.5 million of debt. And so there's about $2 million left to collect on it, with about $450,000 on an annual increment currently. We haven't projected a date of early closure, but it certainly, if you look at the debt service or remaining debt to collect, compared to the annual increment, it's in good shape. TID number 10, the Marshfield Mall is a rehabilitation district, and this includes the Marshfield Mall, McDonald's, and Simplicity. This was created in 2015. The expenditure period ends in 2037, last termination 2042. There is a positive fund balance of $371,000, very minimal outstanding debt, and very little balance to collect. And with the increment, just based on the current obligations, this would be paid off. However, the city did enter a development agreement with the mall. There is, it's a pay-as-you-go. So as revenues generated, as that mall is developed, they will be able to continue to collect or make payments on that. But so that will still continue on through the life of that development agreement. But again, the district is in a good shape and healthy. Yeah, that's TID number 11 is Drexler Drive. This is a relatively new TIF. This was our first mixed-use TIF district in the city, mostly looking at commercial and industrial development. Created in 2016. End of the expenditure period is 2031. Fund balance, there's a healthy fund balance of almost over $160,000. Outstanding debt is $234,000, with an annual increment of about $120,000. So again, in a year, this district will pay off with plenty of acreage yet to develop. So it's still a good sign. And again, possible affordable housing extension. And then one of the newest districts created in 2021, the Industrial Park East. It was part of Yellowstone. It's a 20-year district with the expenditure period ending in 2036. This one does have a negative fund balance and does have a outstanding debt to collect. Most of that cost is due to the land acquisition from the university, and then additional costs to create the district and also to certify that site. So right now it's kind of there's no increment coming in because the city owns all of it, but obviously you're certifying the site. The land was purchased to enhance, get new development to come in, and it's one of those cases where you did have to make the investment because you couldn't buy the land until the district was created because you needed it to be TIF eligible. If in fact, if for some reason that the district didn't generate any money over the course of the next, was it 18 years, that debt would have to be paid by the city. But you're not really any loss for the wear because you would have had to pay for it if the district wasn't created. So 124 acres of development just in the industrial, or in the certified site, and then there's another 16 acres to the south. And then lastly, the TID 13 mixed-use district. It's the Veterans Parkway and Hume Avenue district that was also created in 21. Same expenditure period and termination date. This has a small fund balance of about $4,300, but there is no debt to it, even with the creation costs. There is an annual increment of about $40,000. And so this TIF district, even though the city hasn't put any money into it or doesn't have any debt, is generating revenue, is creating increment based on other development that's happening that is not needing assistance from the city. So, and there's, in addition to what's happened already, there's other industrial development that's been expanding in that district. So there will be a significant increment coming probably in 2024, 2025 from the development that's taking place right now. And so, so that's exciting news, and that's a very positive. And that includes a newly platted residential area, so that's suitable for housing as well. So any questions on that? I know, again, also a lot of information, but important information, and I think this is usually something that I imagine the council would like to see this on an annual basis, just like the Joint Review Board gets it. But
Alderman Stauber?
No, I agree. I think it's good information, and thanks for the nice overview. What I have a question about is economic development, and tax incremental financing is kind of like a tool in the toolbox of a community. And now that you're with Cedar Corp, you see other communities. And my question is, how does Marshfield stack up with our use of tax incremental financing with the overall picture of how successful are we or could we be in the field of economic development? Are we leading, lagging, or about the same as other communities that we work with? And try to quantify that if you could.
It's a loaded question, but it's a good one. Mark, I generally, Cedar Corporation's niche is really focusing on like smaller communities. So like the city of Menominee is probably the biggest client that I work with from a size standpoint. Some of their TIF districts, keep in mind they're on the interstate, I-94. They have a couple higher education sites there. And so they've had some pretty big TIF districts that have come in. They've got Anderson Windows, they've got some large manufacturing, Phillips Plastics, things like that or Phillips Medisize. And so they're, I would say they're, you know, a little bit further ahead just because they've had some massive industries come. They're in that corridor between Eau Claire and the Twin Cities. Other ones, though, I think, you know, I think the use of TIF is done very similarly. I mean, there's nothing, I don't think, outside the box, especially now that the city is going to more of a pay-go system. That I think that really does a good thing, a good job of protecting the city, and I think developers are used to that. I don't think you're going to get too many situations where you have an experienced developer with TIF that's going to, you know, expect a ton of things up front. But that's just what we're seeing. So, you know, development agreements are pretty standard, pretty consistent. But as far as, you know, your TIF districts are all, other than the new one in TID 12, are all doing really well. And so there are, I think if you'd have looked at most TIF districts going back to probably around 2011, 2012, when we saw a lot of distressed designations, even Marshfield wasn't doing as well, and most communities were probably in a very similar boat. So I think it's hard to compare, especially the different sizes, but I think Marshfield is doing really well for the districts that it has in place and the opportunities that it does have.
Alderman Tompkins?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. I have 4 questions. So the first is that the Second Street corridor is already on a TIF or a TID. And you said something about an overlay. So how would that work?
So when you do an overlay, you can overlay, using the definition to describe the term, you can overlay the existing TID 4 with a new TIF district. Any increment that's been captured under the old district still goes to the old district, but any new increment would be captured with the new district. So basically, let's say we have TID 14 tonight. If that gets created, we have TID 15, and you want to do an overlay of the Second Street corridor on TID 4. It really isn't a problem. It just would be that the base value would stay the same for TID 4, but all the increment that's generated, and most of it's probably, a lot of it's tax exempt, city owned anyways, but any new increment would be captured by the new district. And any old increment that has been generated to the point of which the district is created would continue to go to TID 4. Okay,
thank you. For the affordable housing extension, so let's say TID 4, it gets about $1 million of increment every year. We close it off. We get 1 year where we can spend that $1 million on affordable housing. If we choose not to do that, then do you know roughly, if we have $1 million, how much would come to the city out of that million? How much would go to the 3 other entities?
Well, that's a good question. Just to clarify, the $1 million is, it's a one-time event, and there's no limit on the time to spend it at this point. So you can spend, you don't have to spend $1 million in a year. Let's say there's not an affordable house on the horizon. You can put that money aside into an account that's allocated for affordable housing, and you can wait to see. Prior to that, though, what I would recommend the city do is develop an affordable housing program so you know how you're going to spend that money. And that has to be part of your resolution when you adopt the extension. As far as the amount that goes back to the city, we're working with the other staff here and figuring out the actual the calculation, and it isn't as lucrative as it sounds. So it's not like, and I don't know exactly the formula. I don't know if Jennifer can you explain the formula? I mean, the city still gets only its portion, but it's a fraction of that.
So if we go to close the TID and then we want to get all of, get that back on the tax roll, the increment that is generated in the TID at the time of closure gets divided by your equalized value at the time. So this is why it's really hard to predict what you're actually going to end up with at the end, because the equalized value is going to change every year. So you get a multiplier. Then the state reduces that multiplier by half. And then from there, whatever your levy amount was on your worksheet, you get that times that half a multiplier. So, in the example of TID 5, we might end up bringing back to the city as a one-time adjustment in our levy somewhere in the neighborhood of $60,000 as a one-time boost that just rolls over for year after year.
Okay, thank you. So,
I'm sorry, it's so complicated.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of variables in there that we can't predict,
right.
even 1 year out.
But that's good to know that, we have a one-time chance to use $1 million, or we could cash in for 60. It's kind of like winning the lottery. You either get it all at once.
Right. You just delay getting that 60,000. So whatever your increment, your equalized value, and your increment is at that time, you do go to close it, that number is going to be different in 2 years rather than 1.
All right. I have 2 more questions. TID 13, so that's the one that's by Washington and 21st, which we've been talking about a lot. It brings in 40,000 of increment a year. Can that 40,000 be used for infrastructure in development in that?
Yeah, so that is a $40,000 of revenue every year, and then 40,000 going forward. And that can be used, so that has not been earmarked for anything else in that TIF. That can be used to assist with infrastructure project costs. Now, I know that there are public works projects that could be, streets that could be improved and other things like that in the district beyond just creating, new roads for residential. But there's not a limit on, if it came from a business A, it doesn't have to be used for business A because everybody's benefiting from the TIF. So there has to be it's a great example of there's already a funding source. It's already, and like I said, there's a lot more on the horizon with the development that's going on that's not even included in that. So when we look at, TID 13, any kind of infrastructure, you don't necessarily have to factor that in, but that's a nice buffer in case, budgets are, things exceed budgets or things like that. So there is additional revenue beyond what would be proposed to be generated by the housing.
Okay. This is all so important because of all of these things that are right on our horizon for decision making. One more, and I'm done. So pay as you go, we totally understand that when you're talking about someone like the mall that already was there, they wanted to improve their property, and we said, hey, we're not going to give you money up front to improve it, but when you improve it and you bring that tax value up, we'll give you a break on your taxes until, that's till a certain point.
Mm-hmm.
How does that work with new housing? Does pay-as-you-go work with new housing?
Well, it can. I mean, it certainly can. It's going to depend on the developer's ability to pay for things up front. So, I mean, at some point, somebody's going to have to get a loan, right? If you do a pay-as-you-go, it's not going to be the city. It's going to be the developer. So typically what we see in communities is if you front load a project, assistance on a project, the city is going to have to incur financing costs, borrowing costs, and issuance and things like that. They're not going to be able to provide as much assistance. If they don't have to do the borrowing and paying interest on that, there may be more, the incentive for a developer to take a pay-as-you-go is they may be able to get more assistance, but it's going to be carried out over a number of years versus upfront. So there's a benefit to the developer, possibly, if that works out for both parties. But yeah, if somebody can't afford a project up front, and they need it to work, that's where there is flexibility. The city may find there's a need to do that, or there's a hybrid option. So and ultimately the but-for test should be met. So if the developer's saying, you may wonder, well, how's the but-for test being met if they're paying their taxes and we're giving them money back? It still can be met through that process. But so yeah, it can be done in housing. So it's just, it can be a phased approach, but I think it still works.
Any other questions for Josh? So we are entertaining a motion?
No, he's actually hasn't started this item for you. Yep.
Okay. Item U, consideration and possible action on resolution number 2023-53, creating tax incremental district number 14, approving the project plan and establishing its boundaries, City of Marshfield, Wisconsin, presented by Josh Miller, Cedar Corporation.
Thank you. So tonight before you, you have a resolution to consider and a project plan to consider. This is tax incremental district number 14. They go in sequential order, but the state requires that you number them as such. Just to give you a little background, this is a multi-step process, and there's public involvement steps, and there's a number of meetings. So the first meeting that we had was with the taxing jurisdictions, the Joint Review Board, on August 21st. The city then held a public hearing with the Plan Commission on August 29th. And the Plan Commission, as part of that process and legal procedure, they recommended approval of the district boundaries and project plan to the council. So they've already passed that step. They held their public hearing that was required, and now it's up to the council to review tonight. If it gets approved by the council tonight, that resolution would then go to the Joint Review Board for consideration. The consideration, they actually decide on whether or not they approve your resolution with their own resolution, basically thereby creating the district. But the creation date is established tonight, regardless of what happens with the Joint Review Board. If they decide to not approve it, like I mentioned before, they have to provide the reason in writing and have a basis for it. If they decide to approve it, again, the creation is established as of tonight. And we'll touch on it a little bit later as to why the dates are important. Also, before I get going, I don't know if Steve, if you sent an email out about the change to the legal description to the council, but
no, I'm sorry, I apologize, we didn't.
Okay, so I'll just touch on one thing. So there was a small change in your packet that was made since you received it. We changed the word from commencing to beginning, and that's in the legal description, both in the packet and in the resolution. So that was the only change, but I wanted to mention it because the actual resolution will have the word beginning, and that's important because it closes the survey.
Sorry, I meant to do that, Josh.
Oh, that's okay. But if there's questions, we can certainly address that. All right, so the location of this proposed district, this is a mixed-use district. This is located on the corner of Veterans Parkway and West McMillan Street. There's a few vacant commercial properties around there and an undeveloped property that would be suitable for residential. So one of the benefits of TIF is it allows you to plan for orderly development, continue to implement your master plan, your comprehensive plan, reduce urban sprawl, allowing a higher density of development in certain areas with the proposed TIF. So there's a lot of statutory requirements in there. So I'm going to go through some of those quickly because they're not as interesting, but they're relevant to have in this plan. So if we continue on with item number 5, section number 5, this is the laundry list that I mentioned earlier of the project costs that you could have in the plan. We've listed these out because these are all eligible projects, but these are not all of them did we develop cost estimates for, and we're not assuming that all of these would be done. And so one thing I'll mention now is that we have a list of about $3.3 million worth of potential projects. Just because if the council approves this tonight, that doesn't mean that you're giving a blank check to Steve and Jennifer for $3.3 million to do these projects. In most cases, you're going to have a development agreement, or it's going to be part of a budget or a CIP. The council is going to see these project costs that and approve these project costs before they get into. The only exception would be possibly like the administration side of things, where the city can actually use the TIF funds to pay staff costs and consulting costs, the creation costs in this case for this TIF. That can all be paid for with TIF dollars. Same with financing and so on. So item number 6 is the economic feasibility study. So we look at is the district feasible, and will the city be able to complete the projects within the life of the TIF, make the expenditures and within the expenditure period. That is in Appendix B, but we reference it in number 6. Number 8 is the project in conformity with the master plan. And it is. The one change, there might be some rezoning that has to happen for the newly platted area. And we'll touch on that when we get to the mapping, but we do have to note that there might be some change to the zoning district. It doesn't have to be zoned properly in this case. It just has to be suitable for, at least 50% of the district has to be suitable for residential, commercial, or industrial uses. It doesn't have to be zoned for that. It doesn't have to be used for it currently. It just has to be suitable. And so the total district area is about 32.8 acres. we had about 82% of it would be suitable for at least two of those three uses. It's more focused on commercial and residential rather than industrial, but you just need to meet the two uses test. The other part of it is the newly platted residential can exceed 35% of the entire district. We're looking at about 5.9 acres of newly platted residential out of 32 acres. So we're at 18%. We're meeting that threshold. And in order to do a newly platted residential portion, it has to either be a conservation subdivision or 3 units per acre or a traditional neighborhood development. We have chosen that it's going to be at least 3 units per acre, and that's part of the resolution and part of the project plan. We touched on the T grant in section number 9. That's what's called a non-project cost. It's kind of an odd name, but that just basically means that it's not eligible for TIF assistance or TIF financing, meaning that if you get a grant revenue from some other source, or if you're doing a special assessment, you can't double dip and use those grant dollars and then also get TIF revenue to pay for something. So if there's a revenue source from something else, that's a non-project cost. We don't anticipate any in this project because of the structure of what's being proposed. But that also doesn't limit you from getting grants. It's just saying that we don't anticipate any at the moment. Don't anticipate, no relocation is planned. I mentioned this, the equalized value test in the earlier presentation. The city has over $2 billion worth of equalized value. And 12% of that is $250 million of TIF capacity, essentially. We're basically using about 120 million right now of existing increment in existing districts. And so the proposed TIF is about almost $5 million once it's equalized. These are 2022 numbers, I believe. And so because we're doing a reval, it's going to be 100%. We couldn't really figure out that in using the equalization rate. So we used the 2022 numbers. And if we had created this district before August, we would be using 2022 numbers anyways. And the open book or the board of review is just closed. So we do have the numbers, but we didn't update the project plan, which is perfectly fine. Those numbers will be sent to the Department of Revenue once this district is created, and we'll have the accurate numbers in that with the district. So we have about 6% is what our capacity is. And again, once this district is created, this is a small number, but if you're looking at a bigger TIF where you have a lot of base value, once a district is created, you basically wipe it out to zero, essentially, until there's increment. So there's not really any capacity issues for creating the district. One other thing I'll mention, so number 12 is estimated property to be devoted to retail. We're estimating under 35%. That's the rule of thumb. Unless you go higher than that, then I think the clerk has to do a lot of tracking for something. I didn't dig into it, but we're not anticipating more than 35% of retail. And then lastly is annexed property. If the district includes property that's been annexed since 2004, you have to provide a findings of either the city's going to be, it's either part of a boundary agreement, which this was, or the city has to pay 5 years of lost taxes, which is already required by statute. So that's what we identified, that the city has agreed to pay 5 years of lost taxes on the property that's been annexed in 2022. So there is a piece that has been annexed, but we can do that by stating that the city's going to pay 5 years of lost taxes, and that is included in the resolution. So I should add this map to be from the start. This shows the location of it. This is on the northwest corner of the city. And then these are you can kind of review the maps at your leisure. One other thing to mention, the district can only capture increment on the properties within the district, but the state allows the municipality to make project costs or expenditures within a half mile of the district, provided it benefits the district. So you look at this map and it shows a red circle, a half mile from the boundary. The city can make expenditures provided that they're identified in your project plan. What's that? So provided they're identified in the project plan, and we do have a couple of project costs from extending sanitary and water or sanitary and storm through a part of the area that's outside the district. And so we just want to make note of that. The other thing, if this TIF districts can be amended, their boundary can be amended up to 4 times. The project plan can be amended any number of times. There's unlimited times to amend the project plan. So let's say that there is a construction let's say this TIF is doing really healthy or is very healthy and is making a lot of revenue. And there is a mill and overlay project that has not been included in the project plan, but it would benefit the TIF in some fashion. You can amend these project plans to help pay for those project costs. So we did work with your Public Works Department on the infrastructure we're proposing, but there could be stuff that we didn't know about. There could be stuff 5-10 years from now that maybe there's some benefit to expanding the district or expanding the project plan. So something to keep in mind as you go for all the TIF districts that have expenditure period left in it. This is just showing the existing uses and conditions. A lot of there's a few parcels of vacant land that's suitable for commercial, and then the other one for the newly platted residential here. So you can see that on the southeast corner, that's really the focus. The 5.9 acres is potential for newly platted residential. And that's the zoning and then the parcel. So just some of the project costs that we're including in the district include, potential building out of that cul-de-sac, which is Bradford Court off of Adams. That's really where the potential newly platted residential could go. Possible land acquisition. I mean, that includes the utilities and so on for that expansion. Possible land acquisition and developer grants for assistance for new development. So if you have development coming in on any of the vacant properties or even for the housing, there could be some assistance provided by the city, provided that it makes sense and it does cash flow with the project. And in addition to that, there's other administrative costs that go along with the creation of the district. There's audits that happen at certain points in the district life, and then administration, like I said, staff costs, consulting fees, and so on, legal fees as well. So these are just the locations of the project plan, the locations of the potential project costs. Most of them we touched on already. And as I said, a little bit of that is outside the district. So yeah, we're looking at about up to $3.3 million of expenditures that could be undertaken under this district. We estimate about, and again, we don't have a crystal ball, but based on reasonable projections of what could develop in the residential and commercial, we could be looking at around $14 to $15 million of new value. And then that would generate a revenue, if it comes in at the time that's projected, about $6.4 million. So it's, you double the revenue versus what your expenditures are. So there very well could be some capacity to amend the district, provide assistance, or do other public works projects that are necessary. And this is unique because this is in the first TIF district that we have in Marathon County, and the first TIF district on the north side. So it's nice because you do have that opportunity to provide projects or make expenditures within a half mile that is away from other districts. What happens when you have a 2-county district is as a part of the joint review board, you select the county that has the most value at the time the district is created. So that was Wood County. Wood County is our joint review board member. Marathon County has been kept apprised of this project, but they're not a voting member of the TIF district. So with that, I guess I know I'm really long-winded here tonight. I apologize, but a lot of information to go through. So but at this point, it'd be your charge tonight would be to approve the resolution if you so chose. And the reason I didn't touch on it, but the date is important, is if you approve the creation of the district prior to October 1st, so before this weekend, the base value goes back to January 1 of 2023. So anything developed that happened since 2023, which there is some development that's happened in this district, you can capture that increment and use that revenue for projects in this TIF. So if you wait until October 1 or later, the district would probably be, it'd start at zero. There wouldn't be any anticipated revenue right off the bat. But having some revenue coming in is a really good thing for the district. So I'll leave it at that and I'll turn it back over to the mayor.
We have a motion from Alderman O'Reilly, second by Alderman Varsho. Any discussion? You bring me the screen? Okay. And could you, okay, let's see here.
Can you bring us the Zoom, the participants?
Thank you.
Did you just call for a vote? I can't hear you.
Yes, we are calling for a vote right now.
Okay, my vote is yes.
Okay, thank you. So please vote.
Mr. Giles,
Yes.
Mrs. Spiros,
Yes.
Mr. Rigel.
Yes.
Motion passes. Thank you. Thank you, Josh. The update 2024 budget development presented by Jennifer Solinsky, Finance Director.
Good evening. Tonight, we just wanted to give a brief update on where we're beginning to formulate our budget plan for the 2024 budget. And I want to keep the discussions centered around the revenue in the general fund, whereby 85% of that revenue is derived from two sources. The first source being our property taxes. We have received our net new construction number of 0.726%, and that's going to equate to $79,954 of increase in our levy as per the limit of state statutes. The other source of revenue, major source of revenue, is our shared revenue. And that is made up of a lot of components, the major one being county and municipal aid, where 2024 and 2023 number will lose $229. So for 2024, we are expected to receive $4,366,952 of county and muni aid. Utility aid, again, small change in the wrong direction. We'll get about $31,351. With our supplemental county and municipal aid, that's our new section of shared revenue. That's our $1,030,852. When it comes to expenditure restraint incentive program, it depends on how many municipalities are eligible and participating. So based on the DOR's early estimates, we'll actually lose about $60,000 of eligibility in our expenditure restraint program should we qualify. And lastly, in general transportation aid, which is a number that we don't normally see this early in the process, we are going to be awarded just under $90,000 more than last year. So all in all, based on our 85% roughly general fund revenue, we will be getting $1,139,000 more in 2024 than we did in 2023. So that's very good news on the revenue side. I did want to go over some of the Act 12 provisions that will be impacting the city in the upcoming years. The first one is going to be the personal property tax exemption. That is going to exempt certain types of personal property taxation, and that's going to begin with assessments in January 2024. In the meantime, the assessor has to complete a workbook and submit that to the DOR, outlining our personal property taxation. And then Act 12 creates an aid payment for that lost revenue that will no longer be assessed, and that will begin in 2025. So that will be making us whole, so to speak, from one source, property tax revenue, to another, state aid. Also in Act 12, as it relates to shared revenue, that supplemental shared revenue, the $1,030,000, can be used for law enforcement, EMS, emergency response communication, fire protection, public works, courts, and transportation. Those are all eligible uses of that supplemental aid. The one thing that Act 12 does sort of put a wrench in The supplemental aid that we're receiving is a maintenance of effort. This is an annual certification of both law enforcement and fire EMS efforts, and that has to be made to the DOR. They're still developing, the laws get made, and then the DOR figures out how to implement the law. So there's not a whole lot of information about how the certification happens, but the requirements are for law enforcement, that, and I believe it's for populations greater than 20, so this may not impact us this year, but could in the future. They will have to certify one of 3 categories, and that's number of sworn officers employed, amount of property tax levy spent on employment of sworn officers, or percentage of property tax levy spent on employment of those sworn officers. On the fire EMS side, the city will need to certify 2 of the following conditions that would not decrease from the prior year. And the first of those would be expenditures for fire protection services and EMS. The second would be number of full-time equivalent firefighters and EMS personnel employed. Third would be the level of training of and maintenance of licensure for firefighters and EMS personnel. And then response times cannot decrease, and that would be adjusted for location. So that requirement is 2 of 4 to be certified annually. And the penalty for failure to certify is 15% of your total shared revenue, not just that supplemental portion, the whole $5 million. So that's going to equate to just under $810,000 of lost revenue in the subsequent year should we fail to certify. Now, in that subsequent year, if you certify, you get back that penalty that was withheld from you the previous year. So that concludes my revenue update. Are there any questions?
Seeing none. We'll move on to item W, update per city policy number 4.900, debt management, presented by Jennifer Solinsky, Finance Director.
Yes, you may. I'm sorry, we're fighting each other. Sorry. Next, I will provide a required annual summary of debt. This is required per our debt policy 4.90. And I'm going to apologize for, it looks so much bigger on my screen than when we present it, so I will read some of these numbers for you. The city issues its long-term debt in either bonds, notes, or loans with payment terms that might vary anywhere from 3 to 5 years for a loan or 10 to 20 years for notes and bonds. The city's total debt obligation for all of its issues currently resides at $47,159,000, and that includes principal of $47,159,000 and interest of $7,535,000. Now, the final payoff year, this is for payment years 2024 through 2042. So this is a snapshot in time. As we borrow and retire debt, this will fluctuate. Not all debt is paid out of tax levy. There is some debt that is abated. It's paid from property taxes in the TIF districts, but that is not part of the city's general levy. It can also be paid with user fees. In this case, our EMS debt historically was paid for with revenue it generated. Also, under that category would have been bonds for wastewater improvements. They would have paid for that debt out of their own revenue generated from their billings. So for all debt that would apply to our statutory limit, we're looking at that's the 48,368 in principal. The TIDs collect their tax increment, and their share of that increment that will be applied to debt is $9,605,000, which represents just over 21% of the total general obligation debt. There is also, you'll see the debt responsibility by total debt. That's our $47,159,000 in principal. And the only difference there is the city has lease bonds in TIF District 9 through the CDA. So this amount would include those. So when we add up all of that, the TIF debt is actually $11,195,000. That was a misprint in my presentation. And that represents just over 24% of the total debt. We always want to look at our statutory debt limit. This is based on our $2 billion of equalized value. The calculation starts there. Statutes say that a municipality may borrow up to 5% of that limit, which in 2023 would be $105 million. City policy further limits that to 65% of the statutory limit. So for 2023, that's roughly $68 million. And we're sitting at $45,369,000. So we're about 43% of our debt capacity. If we want to look at what would ultimately be levied to taxpayers in our debt service fund, this is what it looks like for the next 5 years. Knowing that we're going to borrow each year, and this will change, but snapshot for today, the debt levy in 2024 would be $4,621,000, and that'll take care of the general obligation debt, and then $171,000 for EMS debt, for a total levy of $4,792,000. And then going forward, just as it stands today, it would be for $4,501,000 in 25 and a little bit less each year as this is just showing retirements, not anything that would be added. If we wanted to look at what would be coming up, and I'll read this a little bit out of order. So in 2024, a total of $5,497,000 will be retired, and this is principal only. Of that, $3.9 million will come from the general debt levy. $150,000 is attributable to the EMS fund, and then TIDS will actually be paying $1.4 million of that debt retirement. So some general comments, and Josh has already mentioned the first one a little bit. TID 12, which is the 120 acres that was purchased from the UW, doesn't have increment. The payment schedule is off to the right. So for 2023 and 2024, with no increment, about $30,000 worth of debt obligation is being advanced from the general fund. Another important thing to note when it comes to debt is that the wastewater utility is pursuing a $10.8 million clean water fund loan to help with phosphorus mitigation. That program comes with the opportunity for up to $3 million in principal forgiveness. This is not considered general obligation debt, as not subject to the tax levy. It is paid for by wastewater fees. And then lastly, as we're looking at budget and planning forward. In 2024, right now, we're looking at borrowing about 4.57 million in new debt to finance the capital projects that were recently approved in the capital improvement plan. So with that, are there any questions about debt?
We'll wait till the other four get on screen in case they have a question, Jennifer. Because as of right now, nobody in-house has a question.
I think they got locked out. I'm not seeing them on Zoom.
Really? Oh.
There we are.
There we go. Okay.
Okay.
Magically disappeared.
I did it right.
Everyone's looking at me.
Yeah, exactly. Yes. No questions for Jennifer. Thank you for the reports. Item X, suggested items for future agendas. Brian Giles.
Yes, thank you. I'd just like to quickly revisit the issue on Kathy Klein. I know some of you are probably getting sick of it, but I know some of my colleagues were concerned about government overreach if we went ahead with a ban on Kathy Klein. But I also know some of the groups who deal daily with the effects of cats who've been declawed, the behavior issues, the issues of pain, were disappointed in the decision. So I think an alternative would be to introduce a declaration against Kathy Klein, introduce it and vote on it at the next council meeting.
Okay, thank you, Alderman Giles. Anyone else has anything they would like to add to suggested further agendas? Seeing none, we'll go to item Y, adjourn to closed session under Wisconsin Statutes, Chapter 15.851E, deliberating or negotiating the purchasing of public properties, the investing of public funds, or conducting other specified public business, whenever competitive or bargaining reasons require a closed session. 2024-2026 Fairgrounds Management Agreement, possible relocation of Communication Department, acquisition of easements related to Adler Road Trail Project, development agreement for sale of lots in Daniels Addition. We have a motion on the floor by Alderman Werner, second by Alderman O'Reilly. Please vote to go into closed session.
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
Mr. Giles?
Yes.
Mrs. Spiros?
Yes.
Mr. Rigel?
Yes.
We are in closed session. Thank you.